Hi, it's Paul. So you've sold your company. You've gone from being a business owner now to a wealth manager. Selling the business, I guess, is the start of a new job, and that new job is about managing the wealth. So when I sold my first company, I would not describe myself as wealthy. It was certainly nice having a reasonable sum of cash at my disposal, but for most sellers, this tends to be really a once in a lifetime event. So they only ever tend to sell a company once, and it's rare for them to sell more than once. So there's a real disconnect sometimes between selling a company and a seller thinking that they've now created a generational event. You don't ultimately get rich from selling one company. For deal makers, you create generational wealth by selling on repeat. So buy, build, sell, repeat. So if you sell one company for six figures, I would say that you're not wealthy. You're wealthier than you were prior to the sale. But if you sell multiple companies for six, seven, or even eight figures, and you do that many times over, then you can create some generational wealth. So my advice to deal makers is very much about don't reinvest immediately, don't chase yields, don't copy friends. Park the capital safely for 6 to 12 months and maybe spread that around several banks. Let the adrenaline settle down and then build a plan before deploying it. The goal is, remember, to stay wealthy, not get clever. So my own personal experience, I think there's probably three pillars. Number one is capital preservation. Number two is creating passive income. And number three is optional growth. So passive income is income that's not dependent on your time. It's predictable and repeatable. So ex business owners tend to love it because it replaces business cash flow and reduces the pressure to the next thing. So real estate can be quite a popular exit choice for parking capital in an asset. It's popular because it's tangible, it's leverage friendly, and it can produce a regular income. You could invest in residential or commercial buy to let, commercial real estate funds, or even real estate investment trusts, REITs. But yeah, tying up capital in this way can also create illiquidity. It can produce a concentration risk and require quite active management disguised as sort of passive. So think about dealing with managing agents and tenants, for example. Dividend paying equities is another passive form of income. So they're usually mature cash generative companies that make regular distributions. This creates liquidity. It's simple, and it enables maybe global diversification. But it is subject to market volatility, and dividends are obviously not always guaranteed. Bonds and fixed income is another passive income to add to the portfolio. These tend to be quite stable, predictable, and you can preserve capital. So these could be government bonds, corporate bonds, or even bond funds. And they're particularly important as wealth increases because the risk tolerance can potentially decrease. Other passive or semi-passive options are maybe private credit royalties, private equity funds, or co-investments. So yeah, illiquidity is not a return; it can be a risk. So depending on your net worth, there are private wealth banks that can service high net worth clients, and they tend to bundle banking, lending, investment management, and structuring together. So typical entry points are, between 1 and 5 million in investable assets, and it will vary by bank and jurisdiction. For example, UBS in the UK requires 1 million in investable assets, whereas with European clients, just 500k. Rothschilds, Deutsche Bank, they can be looking at minimum 5 million, whereas JP Morgan will probably look at, no less than 25 million. And what you get is a relationship manager that has access to products, credit solutions, and it enables you to manage your personal balance sheet and ultimately optimize it. So how banks actually manage your money is quite important to understand, because once you move into private wealth banking, you're no longer the decision maker by default. Typically, you tend to be offered either a discretionary mandate where the bank manages the portfolio for you within agreed parameters, or you take an advisory mandate where they'll make recommendations for you to approve them. So in reality, most banks are quite conservative by design. So their priority tends to be capital preservation, diversification, and risk management rather than aggressive growth. So that's not a criticism, that's their role, but it does mean that you need to be very clear-eyed about, fees, incentives, and alignment. And banks are good at protecting wealth; they're perhaps less good at compounding it quickly, and that distinction matters post exit. One of the most powerful tools available once you've got meaningful assets in a private wealth bank is Lombard lending. So effectively, you borrow against your investment portfolio rather than selling assets. So this enables you to create liquidity while sort of staying invested. So this can be quite tax efficient and strategically quite flexible. So, for example, if you've got a 10 million portfolio, that might support borrowing of between 40 and 60%, depending on the asset quality and market conditions. And that capital can then be used for property or co-investments or even new operating businesses. But leverage does cut both ways. Market volatility can trigger margin calls, and over leveraging is probably one of the fastest ways to turn a strong balance sheet into a stressed one. So yeah, used conservatively, but Lombard lending is a tool. But used aggressively, it can be a risk. I suppose the real goal post exit is not chasing returns, but really about building a coherent wealth structure that supports your life. That usually means separating capital into, I suppose, different pots: protected capital, income generating assets, and higher growth or opportunity capital. And many people probably make mistakes at this stage by moving too fast or concentrating too heavily or overcomplicating structures, or trusting advice without really understanding it. The irony is actually getting wealthy often comes from focus and risk taking, while staying wealthy comes from discipline and restraint. Passive income does buy you time, optionality, and clarity. And banks, advisors, and leverage are all quite useful tools, but it only if you remain in control of that strategy. Wealth, like deals, rewards calm thinking and good process. So yeah, in summary, wealth management is very much a skill. Passive income, gives buyers, gives you back time, and banks are tools, not saviors. And leverage is powerful, but it can also be dangerous. So staying wealthy is probably harder than actually getting wealthy. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you want to be notified when the next video is out, do click subscribe. If you're interested to learn more about mergers and acquisitions, then you can join our free deal maker community. The link's in the description below, where you can connect with me and hundreds of deal makers around the world. For now, happy deal making, and do drop in the comments what you've offered on in the past month. So not company names, but be good to understand what's going on, deal sizes, industries. I'd love to hear what you're buying.